Derek Palmer wasn't the kind of man who made a fuss. A former forest ranger turned freelance environmental consultant, he had chosen Elkhorn Ridge for its peace away from the noise of the city, away from drama. The lake was a bonus. It came with the parcel he purchased, listed explicitly in the title deed. He didn't flaunt it. He didn't gate it off. But he did care about boundaries. That's why, when a teenager cut across his backyard to fish from the dock one evening, Derek didn't yell. He simply walked over and said, "Hey bud. This is actually private property. I don't mind if you fish, just ask next time." "Okay." The kid looked confused. Keran said it was a public lake. Derek raised an eyebrow. "Keran, yeah, the HOA lady. She said we can come any time." That was the first red flag. 2 days later, Derek printed a sign at the local print shop and staked it right where the grass met the rocks at the lake's edge. White background. Black text. Nothing flashy. Private property. Keep off my lake. It wasn't meant to intimidate, just to inform, but in Elkhorn Ridge, even that was enough to light a fuse. The knock on his door came less than 24 hours later. Keran Langley stood on the porch with the stiff posture of a drill sergeant, early 50s, crisp white blouse, HOA badge on a blue lanyard. Her voice was already mid-lecture when Derek opened the door. "That sign is a problem," she said without a greeting. "You're creating division in the community." Derek blinked, then stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "Excuse me?" Keran gestured toward the lake, lips pursed. "The sign, it sends a message. One that goes against our HOA values." "I didn't realize asking for privacy was an attack," Derek said. Keran ignored the jab. "The lake has always been seen as a shared amenity. Families walk through your yard. Kids fish. That's what makes this place special." Derek kept his tone calm. "I'm not trying to change that, except the part where strangers keep showing up on my dock without asking." Keran flipped open her folder. "According to HOA guidelines, all signage must be This sign wasn't. I'm issuing a notice of violation." Derek took a breath, then walked inside and came back with a folder of his own. He pulled out the deed, unfolded the plat map, and held it out to her. "The lake is on my property. Completely, within my parcel lines. I confirmed with the county clerk last month." Keran glanced at it but didn't touch it. Deeds can say a lot of things, but this community has shared traditions. Derek narrowed his eyes. "Keran, are you saying HOA guidelines override property law?" She stiffened. "I'm saying cooperation matters more than ownership. I'll be submitting a report to the board." She turned and walked off without another word. Derek watched her go, feeling the tension crawl up his spine. That night, he stood by the water, watching moonlight ripple across the surface. This lake was the reason he chose this lot. Not to keep it from people, but to enjoy the space freely, peacefully. He glanced at the sign, now faintly illuminated by the porch light. "Private property, keep off my lake." Suddenly, it looked a small dot. The next morning, Derek found muddy footprints on his dock. And his sign, snapped in half, tossed in the bushes. He picked it up slowly, dusted it off, and sighed. So this was how it was going to be. He made a fresh cup of coffee and sat down at his desk, opened a folder on his laptop labeled HOA Docs, began compiling photos, maps, emails, a record of everything. Because Keran might have thought she controlled the community, but Derek knew one thing she didn't. He'd fought wildfires. He'd led teams through court battles over land rights. And, if Keran wanted to turn this into a battle of rules and boundaries, she had no idea who she was dealing with. The broken sign wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Within days, Derek noticed subtle changes around the neighborhood. People who used to wave at him during walks now looked away. A few mothers ushered their kids across the street when he walked by. Something had shifted, and he knew exactly where it started. At the center of it all was Keran. Flyers started appearing, pinned to community boards, taped to lampposts, folded into mailboxes. The headline read, "Let's keep Elkhorn Ridge united. Lakes are for everyone." Below it, in smaller print, "HOA discourages unauthorized signage and exclusionary practices that divide our community." There was no mention of Derek by name, but everyone knew. Keran wasn't just challenging. His signage was shaping a narrative, and in a tightly knit neighborhood like Elkhorn Ridge, perception was everything. Then came the picnic. It was a sunny Saturday morning when Derek looked out and saw folding chairs being set up near his dock. A long folding table followed. Coolers, a pop-up canopy. At least 30 people gathered throughout the morning. Keran at the center, smiling, pouring lemonade. Someone grilled hot dogs. Kids ran barefoot through his yard like it was a park. Derek stood on his porch, stunned. Not one person had asked for permission. Not one knocked on his door. He dialed the non-emergency sheriff's line. Technically, the deputy said, it's trespassing. But it's a gray area unless you press charges or post official no trespassing signs. You sure you want to stir this up? Derek looked back at the crowd. Keran spotted him and gave a small wave, like she was the queen of the hill. He hung up without a word. The next morning, a letter from the HOA arrived. Notice of violation. You are hereby cited for unauthorized signage on HOA visible property. Fine. $50 Diane-compliant landscaping fixtures, fence-like obstructions. Fine. $75 harassment of residents and misuse of authority. Fine. $100. Derek almost laughed. Fence-like obstructions. They were just landscaping stones bordering the lake. But there it was, his first official fine sheet, totaling $225 and climbing daily. He took a photo of the letter, scanned it, and saved it to the growing folder on his laptop. Then he walked to his mailbox. The new flyers were there again. This time, the title was bolder. Say no to dividers, reclaim the lake. Later that week, Derek walked into the HOA office for the first time. The receptionist, a young man in his 20s named Shane, barely looked up. I'm here to speak with Keran. She's in a meeting. Derek folded his arms. I'll wait. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Keran finally emerged. She wore that same stiff blouse, now paired with dark sunglasses, even though they were inside. Mr. Palmer, she said, smiling coldly. To what do I owe this drop-in? I'm here about the violations. They're valid, she said, without hesitation. You installed an aggressive sign, and residents have filed complaints about your behavior. Derek pulled out his phone and showed her a photo of the deed. This lake is on my property. No easements, no shared access. Every picnic, every visitor, you've encouraged them to trespass. Keran didn't blink. Community interest sometimes outweighs technical boundaries. You're not a judge, Keran. No, she said, folding her arms. But I am the HOA president. And in this neighborhood, that matters. Derek stared at her for a long moment, then said, not more than the law. As he left, he noticed Shane behind the front desk, looking down, lips tight. Like he wanted to say something, but didn't dare. Back at home, Derek walked the lake's edge again. A few footprints still marred the soft grass. A crushed soda can floated near the dock. He grabbed a trash bag and fished it out. Then he posted a new sign. This time, professionally printed, weatherproof, mounted higher. Reinforced with steel. Private property trespassers will be reported, and below it, for the first time, surveillance in use. Keran might control the crowd, but Derek had something else now. Documentation, cameras, and the law. Derek wasn't just angry anymore, he was focused. After Keran's ambush with the fines and the community picnic stunt, he decided it was time to put an end to the passive back and forth. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout at neighbors or tear down flyers. He started where it mattered, with the paperwork at the county assessor's office. He requested every file tied to his lot. The plat maps, the original development plans, the purchase history. It took half a day of digging, but the truth was in black and white. The lake, though small, was fully within his lot's boundaries. No community access, no shared easements, no gray area. It was his. Legally and indisputably. He even hired a real estate attorney, Ruth Delgado. Sharp, methodical, and unshaken by HOA politics. She reviewed everything and agreed. You're in the right, she said during their meeting. What Keran's doing, it's textbook overreach. The fines, legally baseless. The trespassing, that's actionable, but the sheriff's office won't enforce unless there's proof, Derek said. Ruth nodded. Then it's time to gather proof. That same week, Derek installed a new camera system, motion-activated, discreet, with high-definition night vision and cloud backup, one above the dock, another tucked inside a birdhouse near the lake, and a third installed under the EV facing the side yard. He didn't announce it. He didn't post online. He just waited. Keran, meanwhile, kept up the pressure. Another violation. Notice appeared in his mailbox. This time, violation number 4. Obstruction of communal lake view with unauthorized structures camera mounts. Fine, $125. Derek barely reacted. He filed it with the others. He did, however, notice something strange a few days later. The lens on the camera nearest the dock had a smudge, a muddy fingerprint. It hadn't been there the night before. He checked the footage, and there she was. Keran, early morning, walking Latte, her dog. She paused by the camera, glanced around, then reached up and smeared the lens with her thumb before strolling off like nothing had happened. He downloaded the video, clipped it, timestamped it. Then, he caught something else. In the reflection of the lake's rippling surface, a faint silhouette. Keran again approaching the dock with a trash bag in hand. She crouched, dug something out of the ground. It was hard to make out. He zoomed in. She had removed the new sign. She didn't just take it. She tossed it into the trash bag like it was a rotten sandwich and walked off with her dog, humming. That was the second time she'd done it. The first time, there hadn't been any cameras. But now, Derek had the footage. He didn't storm over to her house. He didn't post the video online. He emailed it quietly to Ruth, then made copies. That evening, he drafted a letter to the HOA board. It was polite. Measured, attached, were the video clips, a PDF of his deed, and a list of citations he had received, all framed alongside documentation of his legal property lines. He didn't make accusations. He laid out facts, then he ended the letter with a single sentence: if further fines are issued without legal basis, or if trespassing continues at the encouragement of the HOA, I will be forced to take legal action. He hit send. Then, he waited. The next day passed quietly, then 2, then 3. On the 4th day, a response came not from Keran, but from the HOA secretary, Joel, a soft-spoken man who rarely said much at meetings. Mr. Palmer, thank you for your detailed submission. The board is reviewing the footage and property documents. Until a full review is complete, all fines are paused and enforcement actions are suspended. Derek leaned back in his chair, rereading the email. Suspended, it wasn't a win, but it was the first time anyone on that board had acknowledged that Keran might be wrong. He opened a cold soda, stepped out onto the porch, and stared across the lake. The wind rustled the trees, ducks paddled quietly near the reeds, and for the first time in weeks, the lake was empty. No strangers, no kids trespassing. No kids trespassing. No Keran, just stillness. But he knew better than to think it was over. Keran was quiet, and quiet for people like her never meant surrender. It meant something was coming. The quiet didn't last. 3 mornings after the HOA suspension of fines, Derek woke to find his mailbox door swinging open, a single sheet of paper flapping in the wind. No envelope, a typed message in bold letters. You can't own nature. Selfish neighbors don't last long here. He read it twice. Then he folded it neatly, placed it in a new folder labeled Anonymous Threats, and slipped it into his filing cabinet. Later that morning, while sipping his coffee on the porch, Derek spotted movement near the far edge of the lake. He didn't react, just quietly reached for his phone and opened the live feed from the birdhouse camera. Keran, wearing oversized sunglasses and carrying a leash, though Latte wasn't with her. She was alone. She stood at the edge of his yard, scanning like a sentry. Then, with a sudden step over his decorative stone border, she crossed onto Derek's lawn and made her way to the dock. She paused at the post where his new surveillance sign had been. It was gone, so was the sign itself. Keran glanced around, then leaned down and pulled something from under her jacket. Another rolled-up sign. But this one wasn't his. She planted it right at the waterline. Bold blue letters, HOA designated, Lake Access Point, welcome neighbors. Then she took a photo with her phone. Derek watched from the porch, the coffee now cooling in his hand. She had come onto his property, removed his sign, and replaced it with one that completely fabricated HOA authority. And she had done it with the confidence of someone who believed no one would stop her. But what she didn't know was that every second had been recorded. Not just by the birdhouse cam, but by a second camera hidden in a fake solar light tucked beside the dock railing. And that footage showed something even more valuable. As Keran turned to leave, she lost her footing on a patch of dewy grass. She stumbled and caught herself on the dock's edge, leaving behind a bright red smear on the wood from a scraped palm. She cursed under her breath, stood up, and hurried back across the yard. It was small, barely noticeable, but that slip had 2 consequences. First, it placed her physically on the dock. beyond dispute. Second, it left DNA behind. Derek saved the footage, time-stamped and labeled later that day. He walked the edge of the dock and found it the faint blood smudge on the railing. He snapped a photo. The evidence was growing. Not dramatic, not confrontational, just solid, quiet, unshakable. That night, Derek reviewed more footage. Going back to weeks, what he saw surprised him. Keran had been making early morning visits, more than once walking latte, inspecting the yard, even reaching into his mailbox. He froze on one frame, her slipping a flyer into the box. It wasn't HOA issued. It was one of the anonymous ones, the one that read, "You can't own nature." She wasn't just leading a campaign, she was orchestrating it, encouraging kids to trespass, riling up neighbors with misleading flyers, using HOA authority to disguise a personal grudge. It wasn't just about the lake anymore. This was personal. Targeted, calculated. Derek compiled it all: photos, video stills, deed copies, the letter from the lawyer, and a detailed incident timeline. He labeled the folder Trespass Dossier and saved a backup on an encrypted drive. Then he made a single phone call, not to the sheriff, to Ruth, his attorney. "We've got enough," he said. "I'll draft the formal complaint," she replied, "but I'll also reach out to the sheriff's office about potential criminal trespass, especially if you're ready to press charges." Derek exhaled slowly. "I am." She paused. "You know this'll stir things up." "She already did," Derek said quietly. "Now it's my turn." That night, he stepped onto the porch, looking over the lake once more. It was calm, still. But beneath that stillness, something had shifted. Keran thought she could bend the truth, control the story, and rewrite boundaries with a smile and a clipboard. But Derek wasn't bluffing anymore. He had stayed quiet. He had stayed patient. Now it was time for the law to speak. 2 mornings after Derek delivered the surveillance footage to his attorney, he found a plain manila envelope sitting on his doorstep. No stamp, no name. Just for Derek Palmer scrawled in pencil. He stood there for a moment, eyeing the envelope, like it might bite. Inside were 10 pages of printed screenshots, emails, texts, message threads between Keran Langley and someone named Tom H., a local real estate agent. Derek's eyes scanned the pages quickly, heart thudding in his chest. "I'm planning to list before October, but I want this lake nonsense handled first. The buyer will probably ask about that property line. Doing my best to avoid any red flags. We'll keep the HOA on him till he folds or leaves. I've made sure the board knows this is about community safety. I've got them looking the other way." Derek sat down slowly at the edge of the porch, envelope in his lap. His mind spun. It had never been about shared access or some idealistic view of community. Keran didn't care about the lake. She cared about her property value, and she saw Derek's sign on his legal rights as a liability. That night, Derek added the anonymous documents to his growing file. He didn't know who sent them, but one detail gave him a clue. At the bottom of one screenshot, a small Slack message appeared from a user named Shane, the receptionist at the HOA office. The same one who had looked nervous the day Derek confronted Keran. He didn't need confirmation. He knew. The next morning, Derek emailed the HOA board, not Keran, not Shane, just the full board. His message was calm, titled, "Documentation regarding misconduct and harassment. Please review immediately." He attached everything. The footage. The blood smear photos. The footage of Keran removing and replacing the sign. And the emails, every line that proved Keran was abusing her authority for personal gain. He ended it with one simple sentence. "I am prepared to involve county officials and local media if this continues." No threats. Just a declaration. Within 12 hours, 3 things happened. First, he got a call from Ruth. The sheriff's office had reviewed the footage and opened a trespassing complaint against Keran Langley. It wasn't an arrest yet, but it was serious. Second, the HOA fines stopped. Cold. No more letters. No more flyers in the mailbox. No more citations for unauthorized rocks or hostile energy. And third, Keran came to his house. It was nearly sunset when Derek saw her SUV pull into his driveway unannounced. She stepped out, wearing a forced smile and oversized sunglasses that didn't hide the tension on her face. He opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Derek," she began, "I think there's been a misunderstanding." He said nothing. "I never intended for things to get as far. The lake issue, it spiraled. People got emotional." "You lied to the board," Derek said flatly. Keran paused. "I may have stretched the truth. But it was for the good of the community. Derek raised an eyebrow. Or for your listing price. Her eyes narrowed for a half-second before softening again. Look, I'd like to resolve this peacefully. Maybe we could remove the sign together. Come to a compromise. I'll talk to the board about dropping everything. You stop pressing charges. You trespassed, Derek interrupted. You removed my property. You planted false signage. And I have you on video encouraging harassment. This isn't a negotiation. She looked stunned. For the first time, unsure of what to say. You're being ridiculous, she snapped. No, he said calmly. I'm being legal. Keran turned, stiff, rattled. She didn't say goodbye, she left. The next week a notice was pinned to the community board, this time signed by the HOA vice president. Effective immediately, Keran Langley is on temporary leave from her duties as HOA president pending review of recent conduct. Derek didn't celebrate. He didn't post about it. He didn't tell the neighbors, many of whom had quietly started waving at him again. He just walked out to the lake with a pair of gloves and a screwdriver. He pulled up the bent metal stake where Keran's fake sign had stood, tossed it into a bin. Then he took out a small wooden placard. One word etched into it, peace. He placed it near the dock, not as a warning, but a reminder, because it wasn't about the lake anymore, it was about holding the line. And now, the tide had turned. Keran was off the board, but she wasn't out of the game. The suspension may have stripped her title, but not her pride. Derek had expected her to retreat, lick her wounds, maybe even move on quietly. Instead, she doubled down. A week after the HOA notice went public, Derek received a surprise visit from a county inspector. A clipboard in hand, the man claimed he was there to investigate possible environmental code violations. Apparently, someone had reported him for dumping pollutants near a protected watershed. Derek blinked. You mean the compost bin next to my garden? The inspector sighed, looking around with obvious disinterest. Honestly, this kind of complaint usually comes from nosy neighbors. I don't see any violation here. But I had to check. Derek knew who it was. The next day, a noise complaint was filed over a lawnmower. Then another, this time for suspicious camera activity. Keran's accusations were growing more desperate and personal. One afternoon, while Derek installed a replacement motion sensor on the back patio, a patrol car rolled up. The deputy stepped out, cautious but professional. We got a report that you might be recording neighborhood minors without consent. Derek gestured to the clearly visible security surveillance in use sign mounted next to his porch light. These cameras are pointed at my own property. I've logged trespassers, vandals, and theft. I have the right to monitor my land. The officer nodded. I figured, just doing my due diligence. But just so you know, this isn't your average neighbor spat anymore. What do you mean? Derek asked. The deputy lowered his voice. The woman who filed these complaints, Keran Langley, she's done this before. 2 neighborhoods ago. Different HOA, same pattern. She stirred up a conflict, took over the board, got sued for harassment, settled quietly. Derek's stomach dropped. You're saying she's done this as a pattern? The deputy gave a tight nod. Let's just say, you're not the first, and probably not the last. That evening, Derek reviewed all his footage again. He double-checked timestamps, compiled a clean version of the clips, and prepared an official report for the sheriff's department. This time, he wasn't just defending himself, he was making a case. But Keran wasn't finished either. The very next night, Derek's motion detector lit up at 2:17 a.m. He opened the live feed from his phone, and there she was. Keran, in dark clothing, crouching near the dock with a ladder in hand. She dragged it across the lawn, huffing slightly, then climbed onto the dock slow and careful. In her hand, another sign. She hammered it into the post beside the dock loud enough to trigger the second camera's audio pickup. A bold, laminated placard that read, HOA Lake Access violators of this policy may be reported. Derek stared in disbelief. This wasn't bold anymore. It was unhinged. But the footage didn't stop there. After planting the sign, Keran posed beside it, snapping photos with her phone, clearly trying to make it look legitimate. She turned, stepped off the ladder, and fell hard, landing on one knee with a sharp grunt. The sound echoed on the audio feed. She scrambled up, limped back toward the shrubs, and disappeared into the dark. Derek watched in stunned silence. She'd risked everything at night, on private property, with a fabricated sign and a photo op meant to fake legitimacy. She wanted to build an illusion, a defense, something she could show a buyer, or a lawyer, or maybe even a judge. But now, he had everything: multiple cameras, a confession by action, false documentation, and now, the sheriff's office had a full timeline, enhanced clips, and 3 new eyewitness statements, neighbors who had grown tired of Keran's escalating tactics, and quietly stepped forward. Even Shane, the HOA assistant, finally spoke up, confirming Keran had used her influence to bypass board votes, silence dissenting members, and issue fines without majority approval. Derek's attorney filed a formal criminal complaint for trespassing, property tampering, and harassment. Keran was served a notice at her home the following morning. She screamed at the deputy, claimed Derek was running a covert surveillance operation, and threatened to sue the HOA for abandoning her. But this time, no one listened. The power she clung to had collapsed beneath the weight of her own actions, and Derek, he stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the deputy's cruiser drive off. The sign Keran planted still sat crooked at the dock. He walked down the steps, pulled it from the post, and tossed it into the trash. Then he took a deep breath, turned to face the lake, and finally, smiled. It wasn't over yet, but the end was near. By the end of the week, Keran Langley had gone silent. No more flyers, no more late-night signs. Her front yard, once a shrine to HOA supremacy with neatly trimmed hedges and patriotic garden flags, now looked neglected. The porch light hadn't been on in days. A for sale by owner sign leaned against her garage, half hidden behind a trash can. It should have felt like the final victory, but for Derek, something didn't sit right. He spent the next few days fielding calls, apologizing for staying quiet, HOA members quietly expressing relief, even a local news outlet asking for a comment. Derek declined them all. He wasn't interested in going viral. He just wanted normal again. Then came the real twist. Ruth called, her voice calm but sharp. You might want to sit down. Derek sank into his porch chair, phone to his ear. What is it she's countersuing? He blinked. What? She's filed a civil claim against you for defamation, emotional distress, and damage to reputation. Claims your subordinates created a hostile environment and that you manipulated video footage to incite public hatred. Derek's jaw tensed. That's ridiculous. I know, and it's not going to go far. She has no real evidence, and her past misconduct makes her case weak. But there's more. He waited. She's not the legal owner of her home. Derek sat upright. What? I dug into the property records while preparing the complaint. Keran's name isn't on the deed. The house is owned by her son, Daniel Langley. She's been living there rent-free, unofficially acting as his property manager. Derek narrowed his eyes. So, she doesn't even live here legally. She's listed as a resident but not an owner. That complicates her authority on the HOA board. Technically, only property owners can hold board positions under Elkhorn Ridge bylaws. Derek was stunned. The woman who had fined him, trespassed, planted fake signs, and filed multiple complaints, didn't even legally belong to the community. She ruled over. Ruth continued. We've submitted this to the HOA's compliance committee. If they uphold the bylaws, her entire presidency, every vote, every fine, every action, will be invalidated retroactively. That meant his fines nullified, her citations erased, and her position on the board illegitimate from the start. Later, that evening, Derek walked the lake's edge, the weight of the news settling in. The sunset painted the water gold. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful for once. But as he approached the dock, he saw movement across the property line. Keran. She was standing beside her SUV, loading cardboard boxes into the back. No sunglasses, no clipboard, no superiority, just tired. She noticed him watching. For a moment, her shoulders stiffened reflexively. Then, without warning, her posture slumped. She walked toward the property line but stopped just short of stepping onto his land. I'm leaving, she said flatly. Derek didn't respond. Keran looked away, toward the lake. You were right, about the deed, and the lake. I was trying to protect something I didn't own. He crossed his arms. You tried to control people you didn't respect. She nodded slowly. Maybe. But I wasn't always like this. I believe you, Derek said. But it doesn't excuse what you did. I know. A long silence passed between them. Keran let out a shaky breath. I'll be gone by the weekend. Daniel's not happy. He doesn't even want to rent it anymore. Says I poisoned the place. Derek watched her for a moment, then said, You didn't poison it? You tried. But people here, they're waking up. Keran turned to leave, then hesitated. For what it's worth, I did like the lake. He gave a small nod. So do I. She didn't smile. She didn't apologize, but she walked away quietly. The next morning, her SUV was gone. The mailbox was empty, and the house stood still. A new lockbox was installed on the front door, and a modest for sale sign replaced the bent, hidden one from before. Later that day, the HOA sent out a community-wide email. Official notice after internal review. It has been confirmed that Keran Langley was not a resident and was ineligible to serve on the HOA board. All prior fines and directives issued under her presidency are hereby null and void. Derek closed the email, leaned back, and exhaled. The twist had changed. Everything it hadn't just cleared his name, it had dismantled the very foundation of Keran's control. And best of all, he hadn't lifted a finger in anger, just one camera. One folder. One truth at a time. Elkhorn Ridge didn't change overnight, but something subtle shifted in the weeks after Keran's departure. The whispers stopped. The tense silences at HOA meetings faded. The flyers disappeared, and so did the passive-aggressive signage. People started waving again, not because they had to, but because they finally felt like neighbors. Derek kept to himself, as always, but for the first time since moving in, he didn't feel like he had to. The dock was his again, undisturbed, unchallenged. Some days, kids walked by on the far trail and waved. One or two even asked, politely, if they could fish. Derek, always, said yes, because it was never about keeping people away, it was about the right to choose. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the ridge and painted the lake in warm hues, a knock came at Derek's door. He opened it to find Shan, a quiet receptionist from the HOA office, fidgeting with a clipboard. Hey, Mr. Palmer, he said, adjusting his glasses. I wanted to drop this off personally. Derek looked at the clipboard. It was a formal letter signed by the HOA board and notarized.re, correction of records and public apology. The Elkhorn Ridge HOA formally retracts all violation notices previously issued to Mr. Derek Palmer and recognizes the improper enforcement actions taken under a board presidency that did not meet eligibility requirements. Additionally, we extend an apology for the distress and inconvenience caused. Derek scanned the paper and gave Shane a quiet nod. Thank you. Shane hesitated. There's something else. The board, they'd like you to consider joining. Derek raised an eyebrow. Me, on the HOA. We need someone who knows how to handle conflict without fueling it. Someone who understands boundaries but also listens. Derek let out a short laugh. You know, I used to fight wildfires for a living, right? Shane smiled. That's exactly why we asked. Derek didn't give an answer right away. He told Shane he'd think about it, and he did, sitting on his porch that evening with the legal pad in his lap, jotting down pros and cons. He didn't like meetings. He hated politics. But maybe, just maybe, being part of the system was the best way to stop another Keran before they started. 2 days later, he submitted his candidacy. Not to win power. Not to control, but to protect. Because peace wasn't a default. It was something you defended quietly, firmly, and with clarity. As summer turned to fall, the for sale sign in front of Keran's old house was finally taken down. A young couple moved, Ina, teacher and a nurse, freshly married, wide-eyed about their forever home. Derek brought them fresh coffee beans as a welcome gift. They'd heard rumors about the lake thing, but Derek just smiled and told them the short version. Property lines matter, he said, but being a decent neighbor matters more. The couple nodded. They got it. Weeks later, Derek stood once again at the lake's edge. He didn't bring a sign, this time, no warnings, no declarations. Just a lawn chair and a cup of coffee. He watched as geese skimmed the water, and the trees swayed in the evening wind. The dock creaked lightly behind him, peaceful, quiet. This was why he'd moved here. Not for drama, not for a fight, but for this. He'd won the war without shouting. He hadn't stooped, he hadn't retaliated. He'd documented. He'd stayed patient. He'd let the truth do the heavy lifting, and in the end, truth won. The HOA restructured, board meetings became transparent, and the bylaws were enforced fairly. Derek, now quietly serving on the compliance committee, made sure of it. Keran never came back. The house she once ruled from became just another house, no different from the rest. No echoes of control. Just silence. One evening, as Derek packed up his chair, a neighbor strolled by and waved. Hey Derek, she called. Still got that lake all to yourself? He smiled. Depends who's asking. She laughed. Don't worry, I'm just passing by. Derek looked back at the water, the sun dipping low. That's the way it should be. He walked up the path toward his house, boots crunching gently over gravel. Behind him, the lake rippled quietly in the fading light, no signs, no fences, no threats, just peace, at last.